Maybe we should have seen this coming, folks. Yeah, but maybe not this quickly, right? And that the picture that we've got is that Christian Horner had absolutely no clue what to do. Just months after Horner's exit, Red Bull's Monza triumph gave Helmut Marko the perfect chance to praise the new regime and quietly bury the old one. He's now framing Christian Horner, the architect of Red Bull Racing, the man who got it off the ground back in 2005, as the bottleneck, which has prevented Red Bull really going into 2026 with its head held high, being ultra competitive. But if you're really curious as to what exactly Helmut said, here is what he said for your consideration. Ahem. The whole technical team is more open, and they discuss things. They are not blind to what the simulation says. The engineers are listening more to the driver. He has to drive it, and it is important that our top speed is improving. We saw we could drive away from the McLarens and also some other changes. The driver's input was recognised. Appointing Laurent Mekies was the right decision. Given the complexity of Formula One, having a technical expert at the top is probably the better solution. It's now much more structured from a technical perspective, and when everything works together and the driver is integrated into the process, you can see the results. The car isn't fundamentally different, but with this level of coordination, we can deliver such performances. Now, if you're just thinking that Dr. Marko is just saying this for the sake of making Christian Horner look bad, you might have a point there. But there is a level of validity that this man is speaking of right here, and he's definitely not saying Red Bull is back, baby, because I guarantee you, if Christian were around and this had happened, considering what happened to Red Bull last year with the RB20, Christian Horner would be shouting from the rooftop saying, "Ah yes, Red Bull's back, baby, and we're ready to give it another go." Yes, I think this year exposed a deeper flaw at Red Bull, and no, not the second seat curse, that's just a symptom. The real issue? An aging wind tunnel giving false positives and leaving the team, as Marko said, blind. And yeah, Christian Horner focusing on the powertrains division, more on the wind tunnel division. As a result, they rely too heavily on this aging properties data, forgetting that the best feedback still comes from the driver's bum. You can't just rely on computers all the time to find out how a driver would best fit it. It's not like that AI crash derby that we got in Abu Dhabi that one time. You remember that one? That was just an absolute joke. Now, of course, this is just one race. Things could easily change around Baku. It really depends on what Max Verstappen's read is of the car, as well as Yuki Tsunoda's, since the driver's feedback is very much being taken into consideration. The only way that you can guarantee to say that Red Bull are really back on a good path is what happens around Marina Bay. If we get to the Singaporean Grand Prix and Max Verstappen says, "Yeah, the car's pretty good. I felt like we got the best that we could out of it," then you might be thinking Red Bull's on a hiding to something. But you gotta admit, the swing from being 37 seconds behind Charles Leclerc last year to now being 19 seconds ahead of Lando Norris this year, that's nearly a whole minute swing in terms of outright performance and positions. I know there are lots of other variables at play here, but being sixth last year to winning by quite a comfortable margin this year is still something Red Bull deserve to be happy about. And that is with arguably a worse car than the RB20. Although the RB21 I don't think Max would ever describe as being a monster, at least not in its current configuration. But what Marko's message is essentially is that Red Bull needed a cultural reset, something I talked about earlier in the year, and they've pretty much darn well got one, because they've now got a geek in charge of the entire team, instead of a jack-of-all-trades businessman who really does know how to speak up in terms of hyperbole and, rally up the troops and what have you. Yeah, the hype man era is definitely over at that team, and I think we're all glad for it. Because the entire grid is moving toward technically minded engineers and leaders. Enter Laurent Mekies, a very grounded engineer who's pretty much worked at many prestigious teams, including Arrows, Minardi, Ferrari, brief stint for the FIA, then at Racing Bull. He gave that team some kind of definition, because you got to admit, at the start of last year, we all thought it was just a walking and talking billboard. That team now definitely has some character and some good results. Under him, decision-making has shifted. At Monza, driver input mattered more than the data that they got. They backed his push for a lower drag setup and watched him dominate. This could have been the shot in the arm the team needed in the short term, but the car is not different, despite the notable upgrade package bought for the Italian Grand Prix. The coordination around it, though, as Marko said, is different, which meant they got every single ounce of performance they could possibly get. And quite frankly, I noticed that Mekies was going to be doing just fine at Red Bull Racing from the Belgian Grand Prix, his very first race in charge, where he looked at the parts list and was saying, hey, Why is Max Verstappen hoarding all of these parts? Give it to Yuki. Oh, would you look at that? He gets into Q3. Yes, I know it's not completely transformed Yuki's season. He's showing still that he's not invincible and he is still prone to errors, but it's certainly giving him a better shot at maybe surviving into next year than he might have done under Horner. At least Mekies does have some sense of understanding from Yuki's perspective in being one of his biggest champions in getting the promotion last year. You got to remember that. But yes, the last few races, we have really started to see more light being shed in what it was truly like in the Horner era toward the end of it, when it was really looking like he was just shooting in every single direction. Funnily enough, a quote that I'm going to bring from Max later is that he felt like the team was just shooting left and right in different directions, trying to figure out what to do because they simply didn't understand what to do. But all of this is framing something that Marko essentially put, is that Horner, he's no engineer. He's in reality a failed racing driver and decided to get into managing racing teams, which he was really good at, especially in the 2000s and the 2010s, but maybe now in the mid to late 2020s, with everything being so technically minded and going into one of the most technologically advanced regulation changes of the sport's entire history, he was probably out of his depth. That skill set may have reached its limits, and I think one of his biggest gaffes in terms of driver management is giving that contract extension for Checo, thinking that that alone would make him better. No, that wasn't the problem, Christian. It was the car. You should have just changed the fudging car, or maybe listened to Checo when he first flagged up the issues. And several outlets have really pointed out that having engineers in charge of a team can really do wonders for teams. I would note Andy Cowell over at Aston Martin and Ayo Komatsu at Haas, just to name two of them. Moving away from people that motorsport.com said, quite aptly, all-encompassing business leaders like Christian Horner. Business leaders who know how to present reports from different departments to all kinds of representatives in a very glitzy manner in which to stir up hype. As a result of this concentration effort with Laurent, mirroring turnaround similar to Komatsu over at Haas, Marko has also said there's now a totally different atmosphere under Mekies. One in which the boss aims to get along well with all of his employees, being a nice guy. Sure, it's not as spicy or sexy or as aggressive or dominating or as masculine as we saw under Christian Horner, but quite frankly, this is exactly the tonic that Red Bull really needed right now, because you gotta admit, the pantomime villain shtick of Christian, it was starting to get old. No, it had gotten decrepit. Now the only major bastion of personality-driven team principles is Toto Wolff. And even now, you're starting to realise he's starting to get a little bit weird. So is he getting a little bit dog-eared or long in the tooth himself? As such, what we got from Marko was a surprisingly diplomatic read on the entire situation of the team, them no longer being blind to simulators, and saying politely that something was really wrong with the old regime and something needed to change. Very reserved for the Austrian, I'm not going to lie. At least he's a little bit more sensible in front of the cameras and the microphones now. Well, okay, why deliver this message at all? Simple. Because they have to. It fits the recent arc and is doing the business of repairing the reputation of the team in recent times, which has gone to the dogs. They're still the extreme fun-loving Red Bull, the brand entity, but they're far less in-your-face and confrontational. Case in point, we've not had a single peep in terms of protesting that we got almost every other race weekend from Christian that would cost €2,000 a pop, to the point where the FIA changed their regulations to make sure that that squeaky wheel did not get as much grease. But yeah, they've not had to rely on it because Red Bull's actually been relatively quiet. And this was a very necessary procedure because Horner himself admitted at the beginning of the year that they very much had a correlation issue, which was very much a big problem for Ferrari last year. And it was an opposite issue from Haas in that their performance actually was better on the track than it was off the track. That's weird. I'm pretty sure Red Bull would have taken that, though. Yes, this is not an isolated problem for Red Bull itself. This was a long time coming, though, given what they've got in terms of digs. There were crisis talks after Bahrain, where Verstappen finished 6th, and I'm pretty sure more soul-searching after they finished 9th in Hungary. And with the team now not blind to simulation and listening to the driver, Marko told us in very plain language that the prior leadership leaned too hard on the tools. That pretty much in terms of technical know-how, Christian Horner was shown all the data, and his response was simply a Whereas now Laurent Mekies is just taking a look at all of this data and going like, hey, wait a minute. Instead of trusting people to do the job for him, he's getting stuck into the job himself, which means he actually has an understanding in what to do and to keep Max. make the car go faster. It's making up for all of the missteps of recent times, and arguably, I think one of Christian Horner's biggest follies. No, it's not Sergio Perez's second contract extension. It's more to do with something that was really a long time coming. Yes, they will be getting a brand new one soon, in the next year or so, but until very recently, it didn't make strategic or financial sense for the team, at least in Christian's eyes, since he controlled all the power, pouring tens of millions into a new tunnel, or bigger in-house computer doodads. You could argue that maybe that problem might have been partially solved had the Porsche deal gone through, but that would have meant that Horner would have had to give up some power, and no, you can't have any of that now, can you? That's why the deal fell through at the 11th hour. We all thought it was going to be Red Bull tag Porsche or something like that. And also, probably in the eyes of Horner, considering that they were actually doing quite well, they were in the top 3 in the Constructors, and then Max Verstappen won his titles and then continued to win. The wind tunnel they had in Bedford was good enough. That means there was no need or priority to focus on it, and essentially, remember, back at the beginning of the decade, there were considerations that come 2030 that wind tunnels would be banned altogether, so what would be the point in pouring all of that money into a wind tunnel if it's just going to get banned in a few years' time? Yeah, you could maybe lease it out to other ventures, but all of that time and effort, it would have been just a waste. So it was either a case in Horner's mind to either just go ahead and do the wind tunnel anyway for short-term gains, or maybe take a look at that powertrains dealie. Well, he chose the engine side of things. No joke, they were considering to do that come 2030, just rely on computational fluid dynamics, CFD, to save cost and energy, something that Virgin Racing tried to do solely in 2010, and they wound up being around 7 seconds a lap slower than the rest of the competition. So, a bit ahead of its time, let's just say that. It wasn't a completely egotistical choice of Horner's, but it proved woefully misguided, as demonstrated by McLaren and Aston Martin, now boasting about their brand new tunnels as of late. Supposedly, Red Bull were planning something that might have meant that maybe come next year the RB22 would have been made in the brand new wind tunnel. It got moved to another site, and it meant that the planning process had to be started all over again, losing precious months of development, which means that the RB23 of 2027 will supposedly be the first brand new developed car with that brand new facility. Yes, it will eventually come, and Red Bull will be back up to code with everyone else, but it just took that little bit longer, and it could easily be a crucial moment. Maybe Verstappen might show some clemency and wait for that time. It just makes you think Horner made a really big mistake in thinking that wind tunnels would be banned. But okay, you probably could get the FOMO doubt out for this bit, thinking, well, of course they would have to go with the powertrains. Horner burnt every single bridge with every other manufacturer. You think Toto would give him power units? You really think that Renault would actually want to work with him again after what he said about Sula Aditbul and the company, lamenting and lambasting that they underinvested, which to be fair they did, and Renault now openly admit that they did, and Honda's going away, then came back again, then decided to work with Aston Martin, Audi's doing its own thing, General Motors isn't making power units until 2029, so where else could they really go? Ferrari? But as we've seen in recent times, the only time Ferrari has not won a race with its own power unit was when Toro Rosso did it. One time, in 250 Grand Prix. Ultimately, you could say Horner's slump looks like a bundle of causes that stacked badly in a development process that drifted away from the driver and relied too heavily on data, overlooking the wants of the actual races, which might have included the second driver. And oh yes, the old mantra of good is good enough, because that's exactly what happened with Checo in 2023. The car, even though it might have had some flaws, was good enough. Max was doing perfectly fine. In 2024, the balance issue started to come about, but hey, Lando was really far behind him in the championship. That was good enough, right? Well, it's not good enough anymore, Sonny Jim. And maybe the powertrains division might come good, since they can start developing engines again after this season, after the 3-year freeze, to try and help powertrains get up to code. But that is still a bit of a shot in the dark almost, and that's the case for every single engine manufacturer. We don't know who's going to be the best or who's going to be developing the fastest. You can start off great, but if you can't really innovate after that, then what's good is that then? But I think regardless of all of it, a change of mood of Red Bull really needed to happen. And yes, I got the sense that Horner maybe was trying to instigate a cultural reset, but it simply was not sticking, or it didn't look genuine. With Mekies though, oh yeah, it's absolutely genuine. Because you just look at what happened at VCARB. Everyone likes VCARB now. 18 months ago, everyone hated VCARB. And yeah, going back to Marko, he also has a political incentive. I know that's not a big surprise, but I thought I would just say it anyway. In the weeks since Horner's sacking, Marko publicly has argued the sacking was mainly about performance, and Monza is the proof point Marko's waving around at us, showing something is happening, and for fans of theirs to keep the faith. Many reports siding with Verstappen's preference for a skinnier wing to put more weight on his feedback instead of mainly relying on what the simulators said, and completely ignoring Max's direct commentary. Basically, they're making the right calls at the right moment using people who are actually on the ground. And it's really nice to see that whilst Marko can be proud, and he's every right to be proud about what Red Bull Racing did, coming back from what they did last year, even Christian Horner was proud from the sidelines when he texted Martin Brundle and Martin shared it with us all, they are not doing chest thumping. We're not getting Red Bull saying, yeah, we're back from the brink, baby! Max is safe with us for... Ow, okay, that was a bit too much. They're not shouting from the rooftops that they've sold everything. That car has really not changed that much despite the upgrades, but it proves that in this era of Mekies, they can win. We all wondered whether Red Bull would win again without Christian Horner. Well, 3 or 4 races later, well, they bloody well have. And at a track we all thought they were going to be despairing at last year. We're more like getting calm nods of relief that the people there are thinking, okay, all right, we're still okay. We're not completely falling off the deep end. And another thing to consider here is the Max factor. 2025 has been a very illuminating year for this kid, hasn't it? I know I say kid, he is actually 11 years younger than me, so I have every right to call him a kid. It's demonstrated far less animosity from the fans toward the Dutchman. There's far less hatred toward the guy. Yeah, that might have come partially from him not winning every darn race all the time, but I think some of this has been manifested from people starting to see that this man's attitude is actually quite appealing and very, very genuine. He's a natural-born racer, a committed one, who is really happy to work with others to sort something out, not fleeing at the first sign of trouble, which arguably you could accuse Sebastian Vettel of doing. At the first sign of trouble with Red Bull Racing, he fled to Ferrari. And I think a recent good example of Max's mindset came from the Nordschleife affair from this past weekend, because I saw countless people commenting, going, oh, why does Max have to have an instructor teach him about the Nürburgring? He already knows it. He's driven GT cars before. He's a multiple world champion. They should be giving him this license on a plate. Other drivers might expect that. But Max is a guy who's a hardcore racing fanatic. He wants to follow the process. He trusts the process. It's there for a reason, to make sure you don't hurt yourself or hurt other people. It showed a level of humility, tremendous humility. He also got to show us how fast he was anyway, in a car that had 125 horsepower less than the same cars in the same category, because he was technically a rookie. He was living out his dream. He was probably more than happy to go through all of the routines because it meant that he got the license, and then in a couple of weeks' time he gets to race, and then next year he will hopefully get to do the 24 hours of Nürburgring. So yeah, this is exactly why he's valued at Red Bull, because he follows the process. He's not a diva. What I'm getting at here is that I think this Mekies-led era will continue to prove that Verstappen likes a challenge and he likes a project. Yeah, he does like to win, but what this year has also taught us is that despite this year not providing him a title for his troubles, he's not slumping in the corner and sulking about it. He's moved to a race-by-race mindset, and it's paid off in a big way. And it's meant that every single achievement just seems all the more sweet. The Italian Grand Prix victory, I don't think we've ever seen Max that animated in a very, very long time. Arguably, the closest that we saw was when he won the Japanese Grand Prix and got the pole. He was really fired up and stoked. Max has the room at Red Bull, and everyone in that room is willing to listen. Some people might think that, oh, well, Max and the Verstappen camp have got what they wanted, total control. Well, I wouldn't say it's that in that regard, because Red Bull know all too well that if they don't give him the car, he can easily walk, but it just means that he has a team around him that are willing to listen to his feedback, because he does have the chops to justify that listening. He is a 4-time world champion, don't forget. He's not banging his head against a wall, and what he said just recently as I was writing up this video script, that Mekies is now asking the right questions. That's his own wording. Him opening up a little in the sense of how Fridays would pan out. Them, the team, shooting left and right a little bit regarding setup, and the team not fully understanding what to do. Now though, Verstappen feels like the steps are being taken in the right direction again, and it's left Ford, their new partners, dazzled. But for rational reasons though. Jim Farley, Ford CEO, called Verstappen one of the most important pillars of next year's Red Bull Ford project. then singled out the way Max has provided stability without drama through a turbulent year. And Laurent has actually signalled time and time again how Max is immediately on the ball from day one, committing himself to Red Bull, to Mekies. There's no sense of awkwardness or resentment for the departure of Christian Horner. No, what Red Bull are doing right now is sitting down and getting to work to changing the fudging car, which is exactly what Max wanted, and the second driver will benefit from this too, because this is one thing that Max has made very clear time and time again. The second driver isn't the problem, it's the car. And I'm quite hoping that this curse will be put to bed sooner rather than later. Oh yeah, and it also helps that Mark Rushbrook, who's in charge of Ford Racing, has said that even if Verstappen were to walk, Ford wouldn't abandon the team. There is a level of commitment here. And it also just comes across as respect and a calculated gamble that they're just making the most of what they have with Max Verstappen, that they don't think he's going to be staying there forever just because. They've got 3 potential years working together, Verstappen and Ford, so they're both ballywell going to use them. So why throw Horner under the bus this way? Easy. It justifies the summer coup. Publicly crediting Mekies makes the break with Horner feel necessary, not something that was born out of political infighting. Which is a little bit misleading because we all know that it was. We heard all of the dirty laundry. But hey, at least Red Bull's trying to paper over the cracks a little bit to make it look a little bit less, toxic. And let's not forget, this is all coming around the whispers of the FIA really looking into leadership conduct and making sure that everyone plays ball and doesn't get too dramatic. If Marko and the Red Bull board and Red Bull, the brand itself, wanted to make the team look really, really different and looking like they're changing their ways, then Mekies is the perfect guy. He's a really popular team principal. He's a guy who signals accountability and diplomacy, and it's not something that seems staged. It also resets the blame game, because it means that everything that came before Mekies is not pinned on Mekies himself. It gives him that little bit more time. An issue that Red Bull still has, they can go, oh, well, it was like that in the previous era, but we're doing what we can to change it, so just give Laurent some time, everything will be good. Well, quite frankly, after just a few races, we're already seeing a result, so this is looking really, really juicy. Oh, and of course, let's not forget it's a retention play for Max as well. Aligning him, Ford, and Laurent in one story, it makes it harder for rivals to pry him loose, Max, and I'm looking at you, Toto. It tells sponsors and staff as well that the team, they've got a centre of gravity again, there's no vacuum, with the drivers feeling elevated rather than second-guessed by models and computer data. Well, I mean, yeah, it's not an absolute guarantor that Max is going to stay no matter what, but all of the signals that we are seeing is that Max is really, really happy where he is right now, and that there is no reason for him to leave because the room is taking him seriously, and he's got some freedom to maybe realize his dream of doing endurance GT3 racing at the Nürburgring. Even more freedom than Horner was willing to allow him. And hopefully we'll see more and more examples of Max's word being taken as given, instead of what we get at Mercedes sometimes when George comes up with a call, but Mercedes overrule him anyway because the computer says different. It's going to make Verstappen feel wanted and valued, and I say this time and time again. If a driver feels valued where they are and they're not being second-guessed, that's going to do wonders for him thinking about maybe sticking around after all, instead of going through major upheaval going to another team. And yeah, a story demands a villain, doesn't it? Christian Horner being a very convenient villain. And in politics, convenience often wins. And, well, also, Christian Horner did like being a villain, so, yeah, it all ties itself up into a neat little bow. Even more convenient. And here's some convenience for you. Another video for you to get stuck into. I'll see you over there. I'm just going to change my clothes, but yeah, I'll be right with you.